It was supposed to be just another day in court. The room was quiet except for the low hum of murmurs, shoes shuffling on the polished floor, and the occasional creak of wooden benches. No one expected much. The judge looked bored. The attorneys were already glancing at the clock. But when the small voice of a 12-year-old boy broke the silence, everything changed. He was just a kid. Small for his age, dressed in a slightly oversized hoodie, his hands clenched at his sides like he was holding on to something invisible. When he spoke, his words didn't come out loud or fast. They were slow, careful, honest. The cops beat me. That was all he said at first. Just 4 words. But those 4 words were enough to make the courtroom go still, like the air had been sucked right out of the room. People leaned in. The judge's expression shifted. The lawyers stopped, rustling their papers. It wasn't just what the boy said, it was how he said it. Calm, direct, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and finally decided to put it down. But what no one knew, not the people in the pews, not the officers watching from the side, not even the boy's own lawyer, was that the real shock wasn't what he had just said. It was what was about to happen. Now rewind just a few days before that moment. On a crowded city bus, a young black teen named Jamal sat near the front, earbuds in, backpack on his lap, minding his own business. Just another ride home after school. The kind of moment you'd never think twice about. That is, until a visibly pregnant white woman stepped onto the bus, looking tired, one hand resting on her belly, the other gripping the cold metal rail. Without hesitation, Jamal stood up and offered his seat with a polite, quiet, "Here you go, ma'am." She looked at him, maybe surprised by the kindness, maybe just caught off guard. She smiled softly and sat down with a grateful sigh. Most people would have left it at that. A kind gesture, a quick thank you, and the bus keeps moving. But this woman didn't just thank him. She did something else. As the bus rolled along, she reached into her purse and scribbled something on a small piece of paper. When she got off a few stops later, she leaned close and slipped the folded note into Jamal's hand. "Don't lose this," she whispered. And then she was gone. Jamal opened the note when he got home, expecting maybe a sweet message or a phone number to say thanks. What he found instead changed everything. The words on that paper would take him places he never imagined. Right. Into that courtroom, in front of that judge, speaking the words that would shake the room. But what was on that note? Why did the woman give it to him? And how is all of this connected to what happened in the courtroom? What Jamal didn't know was that the woman on the bus wasn't just any random passenger. She had a story of her own. And the moment she saw Jamal, something in her past came rushing back. Something she couldn't ignore. What she wrote on that paper didn't just thank him. It offered him something no one else ever had. A chance, a lifeline. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of justice. But before any of that could unfold, Jamal would have to make a choice. To stay quiet, like everyone expected. Or to speak up, even if it meant risking everything. And in that courtroom, when he finally chose to speak, no one, not even Jamal, could predict what would happen next. Because the real twist, it was still coming. Jamal held the note in his hand like it was something fragile. He read it 3 times before even moving. The handwriting was neat, a little shaky maybe, but careful. It said, "If you're ever in trouble, show this to a lawyer. Trust me. My name is Rebecca Turner." Underneath that, there was a phone number and the name of a law firm he didn't recognize. It didn't make much sense to him. He wasn't in any trouble. At least not yet. But something about the way she looked at him on the bus, the way she said, "Don't lose this," made him feel like maybe she knew something he didn't. He tucked the note into his backpack, behind an old math test and a worn-out library book. He didn't tell anyone. Not his mom, who worked 2 jobs and barely had time to sleep, let alone deal with mystery notes from strangers. Not his older brother, who would have probably laughed it off or told him to throw it away. Jamal just kept it close. Not really. Knowing why, but feeling like he should. A few days later, everything started falling apart. It was after school, right near the corner store where Jamal and his friends sometimes hung out. They weren't doing anything, just talking, sharing snacks, laughing too loud like kids do. But then a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out, one of them already reaching for his belt. The way they looked at the boys, like they were problem before they even said a word, made Jamal's stomach twist. One of the officers pointed at Jamal. "You, backpack, open it." Jamal hesitated. He hadn't done anything. His bag had books, a broken pencil, some chips. But before he could even explain, the other officer grabbed his arm. "I said open it." Everything moved fast after that. Too fast. Jamal remembered. The pavement hitting his cheek, the sound of his backpack hitting the ground, the sharp sting of a knee pressing into his back. He didn't fight. He couldn't. He just kept saying, "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything." Over and over. But it didn't matter. When his mom saw him later that night, she cried without saying a word. She took pictures of the bruises, even though Jamal begged her not to. "We have to do something," she said. "They can't just get away with this." But everyone she called, the school, the precinct, even a local community center, just gave her the runaround. Apologies, promises to look into it. No answers, no action. That's when Jamal remembered the note. He pulled it out of his backpack, unfolded it carefully, and showed it to his mom. She looked at it for a long time, then picked up the phone. 2 days later, they were sitting in the office of a tall, soft-spoken man named David Collins. He was a lawyer at the firm Rebecca Turner worked for. Jamal sat on the edge of his chair, while David read the note and listened quietly to what happened. When Jamal finished, David leaned back and exhaled slowly. "You're lucky," he said. "If you hadn't had this note, I'm not sure anyone would have taken this seriously." That sentence hit Jamal hard, not because it surprised him, but because it didn't. David explained that Rebecca Turner was well known in legal circles. She wasn't just any lawyer. Years ago, she'd been involved in a controversial case involving police misconduct, the kind that made headlines. Since then, she'd been working quietly behind the scenes, helping people who had no one else to stand up for them. No one knew why she'd handed Jamal that note on the bus. But whatever the reason, it was like she had seen something in him, or knew something was coming. The legal team got to work fast. They filed a complaint, gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses. But even with the bruises and the pictures and the testimony, it wasn't easy. The officers denied everything, said Jamal had resisted, said he'd been aggressive, said their body cams weren't recording. One of them even claimed Jamal had a suspicious item in his backpack, though none was ever found. The case got more complicated by the day. That's how Jamal ended up in that courtroom, standing small and nervous, trying to explain what happened in his own words. And when he said, "The cops beat me," it wasn't for shock. It was just the truth, plain and simple. But that truth hit harder than anyone expected. The judge narrowed his eyes. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Even one of the officers in the back of the courtroom looked away. David stood beside Jamal, calm but firm, and asked the judge for permission to submit something into evidence. It was a folded piece of paper, the same note Jamal had been given, on the bus. David explained where it came from, who had written it, and why it mattered. The courtroom went quiet again. But what no one realized, not even David, was that the note wasn't the only thing Rebecca Turner had left behind. Back at the firm, a junior assistant was sorting through an old file drawer, trying to find something unrelated, when she stumbled across a sealed envelope marked with Jamal's name. It was dated weeks before the bus ride. Confused, she brought it to David. Inside was a letter handwritten by Rebecca and a USB drive. The letter was short, just a few lines, but it said enough. "If you're reading this, something has happened. Jamal is not just another case. He's connected to a bigger story, one I never had time to finish. The drive has proof, something that needs to be seen. Protect him." David stared at the letter, the USB drive sitting cold in his hand. How had Rebecca known Jamal's name before she even met him? What was this bigger story she was talking about? And what was on that drive? The answers were coming, but not yet. Because, just as the judge was about to make a decision in court, whether or not to allow the note as evidence, the courtroom doors swung open, and the person who walked in. That's where everything started to unravel. The heavy courtroom doors creaked open, and everyone turned to look. A woman walked in, dressed in a gray coat with a scarf wrapped around her neck. Her face was pale, her eyes tired but focused. Jamal recognized her instantly. It was her, the woman from the bus, Rebecca Turner. For a second, Jamal thought he was imagining her. He hadn't seen her since that day. She was supposed to be on leave, possibly even retired. No one at the law firm had seen her for weeks. Yet here she was, walking into the courtroom like she knew exactly what was happening and had been waiting for the right moment. David stood up slowly. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady. "This is Rebecca Turner." She wrote the note in question. The judge glanced at her, surprised. "You're prepared to testify under oath that the note you gave this young man was written in advance, with knowledge of potential harm?" Rebecca nodded. "I am, but there's more, much more." Jamal felt his pulse quicken. Everyone in the room seemed to lean forward, sensing something was about to drop. But Rebecca didn't speak right away. Instead, she handed the judge a second envelope, identical to the one from the law firm, and said, "I'd like to submit this into the record. It's part of an ongoing investigation that was never completed." The judge accepted it, giving a small nod. "We'll review it." And just like that, the mystery deepened. Back at home that night, Jamal couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, the blue light from the street lamp casting shadows across the wall. He kept thinking about the USB drive David had found, and what might be on it. The word proof kept ringing in his head. Proof of what? Why had Rebecca said he was connected to a bigger story? The next day, David called Jamal and his mom into the office. He looked more serious than usual. He had reviewed the contents of the USB, and what he found changed the entire direction of the case. There were video clips, emails, police reports, but not about Jamal, at least not directly. They were about a string of incidents going back nearly 10 years, different cities, different victims, all young, all black, all allegedly assaulted or wrongfully detained by the same group of officers. Some of the names were familiar. A few had made headlines before quickly disappearing from the news. The patterns were clear: intimidation, lack of evidence, reports that mysteriously vanished, body cams that malfunctioned. And the names on the documents? Two of the officers were the same ones who had tackled Jamal. David leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "This isn't just about what happened to you, Jamal. This is about a system, a pattern, and someone's been trying to keep it quiet." Jamal didn't know what to say. His mom looked like she was holding back tears. It was one thing to feel like what happened to her son wasn't right. It was another thing to see, in writing and on video, that it had happened to others, over and over. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, things were starting to stir. A local reporter caught wind of the case. She reached out anonymously at first, asking for comment, hinting that she'd been following the story for some time. Her name was Carmen, and she'd been digging into misconduct reports in the city for nearly a year. When she found out Rebecca Turner was involved, she knew something serious was unfolding. She asked to meet Jamal and his mother privately. They agreed, carefully. Carmen sat with them at a diner, a small recorder between them, and just listened. She wasn't pushy. She didn't interrupt. She asked about Jamal's life, school, what he wanted to be. She asked about that day on the bus, the court hearing, and finally, about the note. When Jamal showed her a copy of the original note, she just stared at it for a moment. "This," she said quietly, "isn't just a thank you, it's a warning, and it's a message." What Rebecca Turner hadn't told anyone yet was how she even knew to give Jamal the note in the first place. That was the part that didn't add up. Carmen, the reporter, had a theory. She believed that Rebecca had access to a list of names, not just people who had been hurt, but people who might be in danger based on patterns of patrol routes, past interactions, and internal communications. Carmen suspected someone inside the department had leaked it to Rebecca before going silent. Now Jamal's name was on that list. Maybe he'd been watched. Maybe something had been planned. But that was just speculation. No one could prove that part. Yet. Back in the legal world, the judge still hadn't ruled on whether to admit the note and the USB evidence. The officers involved were doubling down, lawyered up, and already trying to paint Jamal as uncooperative. One of them even filed a statement saying he feared for his safety during the stop, a move that, if believed, could weaken Jamal's entire case. David and his team were racing against time. They needed more witnesses, more facts, more pressure. Carmen offered to publish parts of the story, but Jamal's mom wasn't sure. "If we go public," she said, "we don't get to go back to being quiet. They'll know who we are." Jamal sat quietly for a moment, then finally said, "They already know." That night, someone knocked on their door. Just once. A quiet knock around midnight. When Jamal's mom peeked through the blinds, no one was there. But taped to their mailbox was a photograph. It was blurry, printed in black and white. It showed Jamal walking home from school. No note, no message, just the photo. The next morning, David tightened security. Carmen pushed for answers. Rebecca Turner, back in the shadows, began digging again. Everyone knew the case had become bigger than anyone expected. But what no one knew, not yet, was that someone else had just entered the game. Someone from inside. And they weren't planning to stay quiet.